Warriors. This is Jalen, my legal warrior, and today we have Vaani Chawla, who is an immigration attorney here in San Diego, California for more than 20 years, and she'll be appearing on our new series, No Lives Matter Unless. She did found the Chawla Law Group APC, and as a law firm committed to the mission of serving clients with personal empathy. She's a member of the AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association, and is a former treasurer of the San Diego AILA chapter and incoming board member for the Lawyers Club of San Diego. She has worked with underserved Hispanic families as an attorney volunteer for the California Western School of Law Community Law Project. She's a current member of the State Bar of California and an immediate past president of the South Asian Bar Association. And she also speaks Punjabi and Hindi, and she understands Urdu and Gujarati. Thank you, Vaani, for joining us today. How is your morning going?
Great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to hear your answers to some of my questions. How are you using your business and or socioeconomic status to fight against systematic racism?
So if I could, I just wanted to start off by, when you first asked me the question, I was wondering in what way does my immigration practice really have anything to do with systemic racism? And, actually, systemic racism is built into our immigration system. If we go back into history, politically, immigrants have always been framed with as being responsible for, increased crime, declining economies, having poor education. This was true from the founding of our country. But, so immigrants were always viewed with disdain no matter where they came from. The mere fact that they were new arrivals garnered some level of mistrust among folks who were here locally. But there was a particular and higher order of disdain that was reserved for people who looked different. So from the very beginning, our first immigration laws defined people who are eligible to become citizens. So I'm talking about, let's say someone comes, a new arrival from abroad, let's say from Europe, because at that time it was primarily from Europe. They would come into the United States. How would they become a United States citizen? So originally, you had to live in the United States for a very short time, only a couple of years. And then you'd have to qualify because you were white, you had to be free, and you had to be a person. And at that time, person, although it wasn't written into the law, the presumption was that a person was a male. So those were the people who would qualify. Later on, in the 1880s, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. And under that act, Chinese individuals were barred from immigrating to the United States, and those who were already here, many had come here to help build the railroads on the West Coast, they were prevented from becoming citizens under that law. Then from 1965 onwards, discrimination became a little more subtle. So the 1965 system is the same system that we still have today. It's based primarily on, an employer who decides that they want to hire a foreign national. And so they sponsor that foreign national for permanent residence, or somebody who's already here, who's a US citizen, or perhaps a permanent resident who has a family member that they want to bring to join them. But the way in what Congress did was Congress set specific limits, a quota, a set number of immigrant visas that could be issued to individuals from each country. So the problem is that the number of visas available were the same for every country around the world. So that gives the appearance of an equal opportunity. But what isn't taken into account is the fact that some countries have higher populations. With a higher population, you might have a larger number of people immigrating. The other thing it doesn't take into account for is that maybe a certain set of skills come primarily from a certain place. Maybe people from certain countries are not interested in immigrating, whereas people from others are. So what you end up having is long lines are developed for people coming from certain countries, like, for example, Mexico, the Philippines, China, and India. There are very long lines for those folks to come compared to people from other countries. So in some cases, you'll have people waiting 20 years to immigrate legally. So when people say get in line, that's a really long line. And in 20 years, your life could change. Maybe you no longer have an interest in coming. So whatever skill, or if you were going to join a family member, maybe it's the point is sort of moot at that point. But there are others who could still come within a year. So there is a huge disparity. And that's sort of the background on how immigration law has had systemic racism built into it. But more recently, after 9/11, we also had procedures that were implemented to track and register certain people from Middle Eastern countries. And then 3 years ago, we saw restrictions on entry to the United States from 6 primarily Muslim countries that we now commonly refer to as the Muslim ban. So that was the first thing, is that I wanted to think a little bit about in what way is systemic racism actually built into immigration law. And then when you ask me, what have I done? So I've provided pro bono services to some vulnerable populations. Just a couple of examples. One of my very first immigration cases was an asylum case for somebody from Afghanistan. It was actually a full family from Afghanistan, and they were fleeing persecution. There was a woman in the family who was a teacher, and she had been promoting the education of girls in Afghanistan. And so she was being targeted by then what was called the Mujahideen, and that group later on morphed into today's Taliban. I went to DC on behalf of Saba San Diego and the South Asian Bar Association of North America, and we went to advocate on behalf of immigrants. So one of the things that we advocated for was the Korematsu Takei Civil Liberties Act. And that act goes back, or that bill, it's not an act, it hasn't been passed yet, but it goes back to, it harkens back to the 1942 Japanese internment camps. And those internment camps were upheld by the Supreme Court as legal. So that's still on the books today. So the Takei Act would change that. So the Takei Act would make it illegal to detain or imprison anyone solely on the basis of characteristics like race, ethnicity, perceived national origin. It can be national origin or perceived, gender, religion, sexual orientation. And that bill is very personal to me because my father is a Sikh gentleman. And as a Sikh man, he wears a turban and has a long beard. And, he came to the United States in the 1960s, early 1960s. And, I was sitting here living in San Diego, and he and my mother were planning to come and visit us, and they drove down the 8 freeway on their way to visit, and they were stopped. He was asked for his country of citizenship, and he told them United States, and he was then asked country of origin. And after that answer, he answered honestly. He was detained for hours while they tried to figure him out. And this was the first time that I didn't even realize that a United States citizen could be held like that. And of course, things like that happened to a lot of people, post 9/11. There were many men from Middle Eastern countries who were detained in some cases for more than a year before being let go, and they hadn't done anything. They were legally here. So, you know, the Korematsu Takei Act would remedy those kinds of situations. Of course, if someone has done something wrong, they violated the law, it's one thing to detain them, but it's quite another to detain them just because of how they look. And another, you know, we also advocated for the No Ban Act, which is a bill that would restrict presidential authority in banning people from coming to the U.S. on temporary visas, unless the administration can provide specific evidence supporting their reasoning for the determination. And then there are other requirements as well. I also used my my bar leadership as president of the South Asian Bar Association to educate, to lead and host an event where we tried to educate San Diegans about hate crimes targeting South Asian Sikhs.
When you were talking about, and I apologize, I don't remember the wording, but it was to make the government give a specific reason for a ban, like that legislation. Is this recent or is this years ago?
This was last year.
So I guess that leads us into the next question, which is, what changes have you seen in immigration laws in 2020?
So in 2020, not much has changed in terms of actual law. And when I say actual law, I mean codified law that has been passed by the House and the Senate and signed by a president. There have been a lot of policy changes, though. So some of which were put in place through regulations, but the majority of which were put through by presidential proclamation or orders. So, one thing that we saw in terms of regulatory change was the implementation of new public charge rules. So the prior rules that we had, we've always had a rule that said that, or at least as long as I've been practicing, which is quite a long time. We've had a rule that said that we didn't want to have folks enter the United States just to use welfare. So what we did was we had a public charge rule where if somebody wants to immigrate, they have to demonstrate that either that particular person or the person sponsoring them had sufficient income to keep the new immigrant off of welfare. The prior rule was a bright line test. There was a specified list of, if the person's family and the person who was sponsoring was supporting X number of people, you need to make X amount of dollars per year in order to be able to support that person and keep them off of welfare. The new rule is very different. It's very subjective, it's amorphous, it involves many factors. I'm not even gonna list them all, but some of them include your ability to speak English, your age, if you're a child, that's a negative. If you're over a certain age, you're elderly, that's a negative. Your education level, and then there are others, and basically the officer who's making the decision has to look at all of those and try to decide whether the person is actually going to end up on welfare or not, or on public assistance. We've also seen more travel bans, this time premised on the COVID pandemic, first against citizens of the People's Republic of China, and I specify that because obviously Taiwan is different. There are also temporary bans in place right now, as of the last couple of months, on the processing of permanent resident visas for anyone who's trying to get their permanent residence processed from outside the United States. We have, as of about a month ago, a temporary ban preventing people seeking certain temporary work visas from entering. And then yesterday, another lovely change, invalidating the ability of foreign students to continue their U.S. education. So students who are here on F1 visas will not be able to continue their education at U.S. universities if the universities are going to online instruction in the fall. So, we've had a lot of constant change.
Well, if our viewership wanted to further the discussion about systemic racism or get a hold of you for any immigration questions and to consult with you about anything, how can our viewership get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can send an email to me at vchawla@chawlalaw.com. That's spelled V like Victor, C like cat, HAWLA, at CHAWLALAW.com.
Well, thank you so much for appearing on No Lives Matter Unless. You've definitely not only educated and inspired me, but hopefully also our viewership, and to also empower our viewership to take action to fight against systemic racism. And thank you for effectuating a positive change today and every day by using your business and your socioeconomic status to do so. And it was a pleasure interviewing you. And I look forward to future collaborations. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.